Okay, so I'm going to talk today about Chittamatra view. Did I talk about it last time?
Yes, you particularly talked about the what is mind, but you did introduce Chittamatra.
Okay, so actually since coming up with that what is mind, I've thought more about it, and so I want to update that document. It's just the beginning of something, beginning to draw together the different ways we talk about mind, or talk about the different things that are translated as mind. I've been playing around with it more and realising, oh dear, it slides all over the place. And even when you say something like mind is an object outside the mind, quite often we will then switch from talking about mind to experience, won't we? Is the object outside of our experience? And looking at that and thinking, you could say we only have our experience. It's almost like we're saying we only have our mind, isn't it? But then we hear experience as different things. I've noticed when you talk to people about, look at your experience, quite often the first thing people will do is to look at things they've learnt from their experience. Because we use it like that, don't we? So I think I'll work on that a bit more, because the more I looked at it this morning, the more it slid around. So I'll see if I can get into something a bit sharper, a bit more focused. I also noticed I was looking for the first time at the various things you've been given online to look at. I numbered them for myself. So that was one, and then you've also been given the Chittamatra view and science, which I thought was quite interesting actually. I'd forgotten I'd written that. And then the Chittamatra view, reflection and meditation, which I thought was quite good actually, for kind of something you can really focus on as a practice. And then there was the three natures, which we need to talk about more, but then some questions came up in regard to that. And then something I wrote about, in general, about the Chittamatra view. I don't know if anybody's got any comments on any of those documents that they found particularly helpful or interesting or confusing. Anything? Anyone looked at them? If you have looked at them, put your hand up. Okay, so some people. Is anybody online? Yes, some hands up.
Yep, Kendon.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I went back to look at them because some of the questions arose on account of the things in these things. So I thought, oh, what have they got? What have they got? And how should they be looking at them? We'll work that out as we go along. So in general, there's this shift from the shravaka view, where we've been looking at the skanders as conditioned and impermanent and changing and not to be held on to because they're not self, and using the dream example in relationship to that, but not really examining very deeply into what the skanders actually are, other than recognizing that they're unreliable because they're conditioned. So whatever our first notion was of what the skanders were kind of stands. And if we look at this historically, it's rather like when they were first, what's the word for it? They were first forming up a body of doctrine as a Buddhist tradition, they were looking at what were the various objects of all the different senses, what were the various known things that were being seen as being empty, which being seen to be not self, and which ones could be seen to be unconditioned and therefore to be rejected, and that we could be aware of in our practice as what is to be given up. So the skanders are to be given up because they are impermanent, so you have to kind of look at them to see they're impermanent. And they would make lists of these various things, like the body, and then the senses, and the different objects of the senses, and different kinds of consciousness, and different moments of consciousness, and the lists would go on. And kind of by seeing all these things are not self, it's sort of like, this is self, what's left? Well, is that then self? That question kind of got a bit, I don't know, things seems to have got a bit lost, and it just seemed to be contented to just look at what wasn't self and talk about that. And then you get to the Chittamatra view, where you're really beginning to question these categories of mind and body, and what are all these dharmas, all these things that you're looking at, you're taking as an object of awareness. What are they all? It's as if there is a world out there that's beyond the senses, so those objects are impermanent and you let go of them, and then the sense impressions are impermanent and you let go of them. And it's kind of, it's almost like a kind of nihilism, because, well, what is there then? What is it all then? And what are other sentient beings to us then, really? What's our connection with them? It's all a bit kind of, it's all become like atoms of dharmas, lots of dharmas that can be divided up smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's just like, so what connects it all together? And then beginning to question that anyway, do we actually know? What do we actually know? Do we ever know anything that's, how do we know anything? And this became much more a huge discussion within the Buddhist schools. How do we know anything? What is an object of knowledge? How do we know it's there? I know something, I think I know something. There's a bit of paper here. How do I know that? Well, because it's there and my eye is seeing it. How do I know it's there? Well, because I'm seeing it. But that's your knowledge. It's your subjective knowledge. But how does it meet with the objective thing that's your knowing? So it's a really interesting question, isn't it? There's I think it's in the DHB, it's a question that I raised at one point, where you're letting go into space, and you sort of think, yeah, I can let go into space, and you're not making much distinction between imagining space and there actually being space, are you? I'm not. I'm sort of thinking, yeah, let go into space, there's space. So, how big is space? Well, it could be, could go out to the horizon, could be as much space as that, could be even more space than that, could be space that goes out as far as the stars or the, galaxies. So, yeah, and then you stop and you think, yeah, but I'm imagining that, don't we? You sort of think, I'm imagining that. So it's very vast, but I'm imagining it. So where is the actual space that I'm imagining in relationship to my imagination? You see what I mean? There's all that great space out there, the universe itself, and then there's my mind that's imagining it. So is there somewhere a boundary between my mind that's imagining it and the actual space that's it? Because you might think, well, my imagination doesn't have any limit. It doesn't end anywhere. There's no boundary where it says, okay, this is the end of your imagination. No further. You can go no further. It's nothing like that, is there? And then the same with the universe. The vastness of space. There's no little signpost somewhere saying the end. Nothing beyond this point. It's inconceivable, isn't it, to have such a thing? So you've got these two vast spaces, haven't you? Your own mind and this universe. What's the connection between the two? Are they two separate entities that never meet? What would that mean? Or does one open out into the other? What does that mean? Or is it the wrong question? Does the question assume something that isn't actually right? If you see what I mean. I'm thinking there's the outside space and then there's the inside space. And where do they meet? And that's inconceivable, isn't it? Do they meet here? Wow. Or do they meet at some unspecified point going out? Or is it really the wrong question? Maybe it's based on an assumption that they're different. And that they're... But then we can't get our head around that, can we? And when I say head, if you try to imagine it or think it or have a concept of it, nothing happens, does it? Can't. But maybe we still know the answer. So we know it. We're living the answer, aren't we? We are the living evidence of the answer. Because, our imagination isn't something different from us. No one else has access to it. And we're asking this question. It's our question. It's totally within the realm of our experience. But for some reason we've made a model of the universe and ourselves. It doesn't work. Do you see what I mean? Do you understand what I mean when I say a model? We kind of made a picture in our mind of, there's outside and then there's inside. And yeah, I'm happy with inside. Got a handle on that. And, well, I've got information that tells me about outside, so I'm sort of happy with that. But actually, it doesn't quite work, does it? That way of thinking doesn't quite work. If it's outside, how did anyone ever know about it? But if it isn't outside, how does that work? And there's a tendency to think, oh, well, there's only inside then, isn't there? It's all me. It's all my imagination. Well, what does inside mean if you haven't got outside? The only purpose of this is really to break up our concepts. It's not to make another theory. You can see your mind that is trying to kind of, so then is it like this, or so then is it like that? Or does that mean this, or does that mean that? As if somehow, with a little bit more effort, I could just understand. And it's that mind we've got to kind of really wear out, really. So we have to keep exercising it. We have to keep asking the questions to make it work. So then when you work it, you can see it's very intelligent and it's very busy. And has it succeeded yet? And could it succeed? Why couldn't it succeed? It takes ages and ages to really recognise what that mind's trying to do. Because it's always playing games on us. Because, you think, oh, I see, it's beyond concepts, that's all right. Oh, I'm not going to understand it, so that's all right. So then it's closed down again. It's managed to kind of find a way of modelling to yourself, oh yes, well I'm this person that can't understand that kind of thing. Aha, that's a nice clear model I can rely on. I absolutely can't understand that kind of thing, so that's all right. Whew, off the hook, So I'll just carry on in my little world because I don't understand this kind of thing. And it's like you're holding on to this, this, what do you call it? Almost a theology. It's your belief system. I am this person who has this special quality of not being able to understand anything. And I can operate in this world and make it all work the way I want it to without understanding anything. But I'm holding this view very strongly and then wondering why I can't understand anything. Well, if you already hold a view, you don't see, you can't see what's there because you're already holding a view.
Sounds like the government.
Oh, yeah, sounds like an awful lot of familiar things, yeah. Yeah. So really the Chittamatra view is not really trying to give you a theory of the universe that's going to work. But it is actually going to tease you into looking where you don't usually look. Because we don't usually look at that glaring, mysterious thing, do we? That, oh, where does my mind meet the outside world? I'm sure I have a mind. Things come into my mind. But where do they come from that's outside my mind? And yet I still go back to my theory, my sort of assumed thing that there's me and my mind, that things outside of it come into. But then, no, I don't think that. That would be silly, wouldn't it? I mean, how could here's my mind, my imagination. Things can't actually penetrate into it from outside it. I mean, that's a silly idea, isn't it? So then how do we know the world? If it's not all just our imagination, how do we know it? I mean, we've already got this idea it's all my imagination, haven't we? But we don't really believe that. So it's really, all this needs to be, I suppose the modern word is deconstructed, isn't it? It all needs to be allowed to be a bit more free-floating. Yes, I don't understand it in the kind of sense of opening your mind. If you want to understand something and you don't understand, first thing is you've got to recognise you don't understand, so that's a kind of opening. But then thinking, I don't understand, is closing, isn't it? So when you say I don't understand, there's a sense of I could, but I don't yet. Whereas I don't understand, it's like, I'm not going near there. It's completely closed. So it's really important to notice any closing off like that. It's the same as it's all through the DHB, isn't it? The same instruction. Really opening up that strangeness of that. What is it then? But not, we're not going to get an answer quickly, but we will get an answer. We could get an answer quite quickly to that mind that is trying to come up with another theory. And we have to work with that quite a lot. Like, I'm trying to understand it. Oh, yes. So what am I thinking now? Oh, I'm thinking that. Does that work? No, it doesn't. If I think that, then that happens. If I think that, that happens. So that's actually all opening, isn't it? That movement towards opening out. And then at some point you think, I want it to finish. I want to just say, okay, it's like that. But notice it's a very strong impulse. I want it to be like that. I want to be able to move on. I want to know it's like that. Now really notice how strong that impulse is. To kind of, yeah, it's a very strong impulse. What would it be like if I didn't close down and I allowed myself not to know? Not to know, or not even to try to know. So you're sitting in meditation and you recognize it's not like that. There's nowhere where I could find a boundary between outside and inside. Or yet I'm still sitting here, breathing, letting go into space. Something's happening. And if you keep very simple, gradually, I suppose the traditional way to describe it is through the power of your insight, the veils are starting to drop away, and little glimpses of another way of seeing start to emerge. Gradually dawns on you, this is the way you have to go. That's a good time to come and talk to me about it. See if that's right, whether you're getting that right. In the Chittamatra view, at that moment when you notice, whether it's space we're talking about or an object you're talking about, when you notice there's no way what your internal experience of it and what it is can't be different. It can't be separated. You can't separate those. Then in that instant, you could say there's a flash of what they would call the prabhasvara chitta. You could say non-dual awareness or something. Doesn't usually last very long because you immediately go back into thinking. You go back into that habit of projecting outward there's a hand and inward there's me seeing it. But you start to notice, if even for a fraction of a second I can doubt that they're separate, there's a little flash of something. Maybe some deeper understanding that's possible. Then it's gone because your habit's so strong to see it as outside and this inside and separate. But this is, you have to practice the meditation. That's why the Chittamatrins are called Yogacarins, because they started to use this as a basis of their meditation to see, keep looking to see they can't be separate. And then there'd be this flash of the Prabhasvara Chitta, what they would call the pure mind. And you could think to yourself, well, isn't that very similar to what we're teaching in the DHB, or teaching in the formless meditation, or teaching in, if you've studied any Shentong stuff, isn't that the same? And Kim Rinpoche would say, well, possibly experientially it's the same on the path. You know, that's how we start to recognise the Prabhasvara Chitta. But what the Chittamatras were criticised for, whoever these Chittamatras were, what they were criticised for was because they tried to explain this Prabhasvara Chitta as being I suppose you'd have to say still a conditioned phenomenon within time, so that you could divide it into moments, very much like, you know, we don't think that we divide our mind into moments. You know, if I say, oh, you divide your mind into moments all the time, you'd say, what? I don't know if I do or not. But actually, if I were to ask you, well, what you were thinking a moment ago, is it still here? What would you say? I mean, is that thought of what you were thinking a moment ago, is it still here? You know, it's past, isn't it? Even if I think of it, that would be now, wouldn't it? So what's gone has gone. So I definitely think I'm living moment by moment by moment, and the moments that I've lived are gone, and the ones I haven't lived haven't come yet. So I'm living moment by moment by moment. So yeah, I'm dividing it into moments. I mean, not really. You know, if I say, well, how long is one of these moments? You say, well, it doesn't have a length of time, does it? It's silly. How long is a moment? That'd be silly. How big is a point? You know, that'd be silly. Points don't have dimensions. Moments don't have duration. Oh, that's very clever, isn't it? Have I lost you? We do think like that, don't we? Yeah. And that again is one of those, the same as the inside and outside thing. Oh, I always think like that. But it can't be true. But anyway, we don't go into that in the Chittamatra view. Although you might have noticed it when you were looking at the shravaka view. You know, we talked about it then, didn't we? So we're just coming back to the same point. It is spiral learning. You're coming back to the same point again and recognising that if there are no moments, or if moments are without dimensions, then we can't actually, we can create a model, say yes, the mind is like a stream of moments going on like that, and they arise dependent on what happened before, and you know, they're all connected by our memory and all these things. We can have a sort of explanation, but then when you look at the explanation, you realise it can't be like the way I'm thinking. Because then a moment would have to have some duration, because if it didn't have any duration, there wouldn't be any time. If there wasn't any time, my whole idea of creating a world out of my memory and all of these things wouldn't work. So if it does have dimensions, so in a way, because I'm talking like this, I'm actually moving even a bit further into the Madhyamaka, where they go into this into even more detail. So I think the point I'm making there is that although we've got the beginning view, shravaka, next view Chittamatra, next view Madhyamaka, actually we had the Madhyamaka view all along of this isn't working. You know, you can't find the moments that you think you can find. So you go so far as to recognising, okay, so this isn't self, must be somewhere else, or whatever. But anyway, this can't be self. And then you look again and you think, oh, and the world can't be outside. You know, it can't be this division into inside and outside. And then you look again at the same thing and you realise any sort of theory I have about it isn't going to work. This is a Madhyamaka. And then finally you look at it and you recognise that you know it by means of this non-dual jnana, which is non-conceptual. So you can see there, actually, the whole time it's just talking about the same thing, focusing slightly differently to sharpen up our awareness, really, of what we're actually doing. And the shravaka view is what we're doing. It's not those shravakas out there, aren't they silly? It's like, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing that. And even when I move through to the Chittamatra and then I move on to the Madhyamaka and I move on to the Shentong, I'm still doing what I was doing in the shravaka, you know, before I even started looking at the shravaka view. So I really want to stress its spiral learning and not to think, you know, you finish one and then you move into the other. Because if you finished the first one, you would have actually arrived at the last one. Because actually they're only conceptually divided. It's just a device, it's just a model to kind of help us to focus. I've probably said that before, haven't I? Yeah, but still, keeps coming back round. I probably say it every time. But still, it comes back round, doesn't it? Okay, so, looking at these questions, where shall I start? I thought as I was going through them next time, when you send questions and you put them online, I'll try and answer them online. I started that this morning with Jackie's questions, so that, because otherwise I've got all these questions at once and I'm trying to fit them into a talk and I might miss bits out. I'll not get through it all. So one question that came up in various shapes and forms would the world still be there if I wasn't? It's the obvious question, isn't it? If there's no separation between my mind and the world, it seems as if the world is dependent on my mind, doesn't it? And there are different ways you might hear it. You might hear, well, what do I mean by mind in this context? If there's nothing outside of my mind, then it's all my mind. So if I died, would it all disappear? And if it was still there, then it would be separate from my mind, because I'm not. Seems to be true, doesn't it? But we've done the shravaka view, and the skanders are not myself. So if what I'm looking at is the skanders, well, they're not myself, and they're not separate from myself. They're not myself, but they're not separate from myself. According to the Chittamatra view. Whereas before we were saying they were separate, weren't we? We were saying, well, they're the skanders and therefore they have to be abandoned. If not. But now we're saying There's no separation. So what is it that's not separate? They're not separate in substance. Well, since they're not, in a sense, they're not any substance, and neither is the mind. So whatever they are has the qualities both of mind and of objects of mind. But it's not one or the other. And can't be grasped. Really, we want to grasp, don't we? We want to grasp. I think we had this question the other day, didn't we? And I was quoting, who was it? What, that Western philosopher, and that little poem they used to have. When they're asking about if there's nobody looking at the tree in the quad, would the tree still be there? And the voice comes from on high saying, yes, it'll still be there because God's there. So God knows it, so it'll still be there because it's still an object of knowledge in somebody's mind. It's the same sort of question, it's the same sort of investigation of, is there a kind of cosmic intelligence or mind that we're all, we're all expressions of in some sense? It starts to sound very, we've had this just a few days ago, didn't we? It's all sounding very godlike, isn't it? Like we're all, well, it's like THB as well, isn't it? We're all emanating, we're all emanations from the openness, clarity, sensitivity, the true nature of being. It's going to be along those lines somewhere, isn't it? It's quite interesting because when you start to ask questions, it's really very hard to stick to just one view. Because the answer to the view, if you like, is further down the line from just the Chittamatra view. But still, maybe that helps to have had an answer like that. Might help you then to settle to the practice, because you think, oh yes, right, I kind of know what direction the answer must be in. As I relate to the openness, clarity, sensitivity of my true being, if I relate to that, then, and I let go of the question, trying to grasp an answer to the question, maybe from that place, an intuitive sense of what it must be starts to wake up almost. It's like, and you might notice, oh, I have had little experiences that, this isn't so unfamiliar to me actually. And I think especially when you think of the example of a dream. When we were doing the dream in the shravaka view, it was like, you're having a terrible dream or a very exciting dream, and then you wake up and it's all gone. Like it wasn't me. So it didn't happen. It's like I'm in this completely different space that has nothing to do with everything that was going on in the dream. And that's quite liberating, just to use that image, isn't it? Like I'm really worried about something, really, really worried, and I think, oh, it's like worrying in a dream. Oh yes, I'm dreaming and worrying, and there is nothing to worry about. Suddenly there's all this sanity and openness and freedom and simplicity. So in the shravaka view, we go that far. In the Chittamatra view, it's like when you're having a lucid dream. Do you all get lucid dreams? Who does? Well, some people. And who's never had a lucid dream? All right. I mean, I've only had very few in my lifetime, but it's very fascinating to suddenly recognise that you think you're awake, you think everything's just like this, and then you suddenly realise, oh no, you know, like I remember one dream I thought, we don't have a place like that in our house. This can't be our house because we don't have a place like that. And then I'm still walking around and talking to people and thinking, this can't be right because we don't have a place like this at home. And it very slowly, the spell would break, you know, and I sort of think, oh, now I'm dreaming. Of course I'm dreaming. But it was so completely, all my senses were like I was there. It happens so rarely, but when it does happen, you realise, oh, the mind has that capacity to create everything. I think once I landed on the ground, I sat with a clunk, and I realised even your physical sensations can be, your mind can actually give you an impression that you're falling, or you've landed, or you've hit something, you know, and it isn't happening. So it's like even more vivid than before, because you're now realising, oh, this is the mind itself has this power to produce both the one experiencing it and the thing you're experiencing. It has that power to do that, which is, I mean, that's an eye-opener, isn't it? So it could be quite empowering. I know somebody who was telling me, yes, he said, lots of lucid dreams, and you know, I used to play with them a bit. I used to make them do what I wanted them to do and go where I wanted to go. I got bored with the whole thing and I stopped doing it. Well, must have been practicing in a past life, I think. I never got to the point where I'm bored with it. It doesn't happen enough. But again, I think it gives you an indication what we're talking about in the Chittamatra, because how is the mind able to produce all that? How is it able to produce both the world and the one knowing the world, and the one to know the other when they're not actually, and you know they're not separate. They're not separate. You say, well, yes, but it isn't the real world. Well, put that on hold for a while. You do know the mind can do that. So it can take as an object something that isn't actually separate from itself. And, you know, there's this sort of play going on. And that's where, if you can work on that edge, as it were, you get the Prabhasvara Chitta starts to, if you like, starts to break through. The way you could interpret it to yourself is, oh, I have a little moment of Prabhasvara Chitta, and then it switches off again. Then I have another little moment, then it switches off. But that's maybe too much over-interpreting to say it was switching on and off. It might be simply that I'm imposing on it the idea of a short moment of time. That's moving on again. Just to be able to practice recognising that everything that I'm seeing is actually the tsal of the chitta. When I say tsal, it's a skill, something that mind can do. So I don't know, I can't find mind, I can't find any mind, but it can do this. It can produce a world and a sense of somebody looking at a world when actually both of them are coming from the same power or soul, or it's doing both, whatever it is. I can't grab it as an object of consciousness, but the evidence of it being there is that this world is appearing to something that isn't separate from it. And then what happens is another process breaks in, which then solidifies those as that's the world out there, this is the world in here. And then there's like a real belief that they're separate. And that's that whole world where we're convinced that they're separate and we're separate leads to further and further confusion. But that that's what's called the parakalpita nature. You know, we talk about 3 natures, but that is called the parakalpita nature. And it's empty in a certain kind of way. It's empty in the sense that that separate object out there does not exist, never could exist. It doesn't even make sense to say it exists. And we really have to become very convinced of that in order to stabilize any further insight. That's the first level at which we have to start to notice and look. So I haven't answered the question really, have I? Would the world still be there? What would the world be if it were there? I think you're best, if you want to contemplate that more, it would be good to go back to the Trusting the Heart of Buddhism section, where it talks about emanation and mandalas emanating, and that what is there is those mandala connections that are not mind or not outside mind or inside mind or anything. They're simply the connections that are there. And especially I think you need to think about what we mean by our personal mandala. It's sort of lurking throughout the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. It's lurking there in the background. We're talking about, well, this isn't self and that isn't self, and there's nothing separate from the mind, and we do this, or we do that, or we choose this, or we have to practice like that. And you see, it's this lurking we that's still there all the time. Well, what's that? And it's not mentioned often, actually, if at all. I don't think I've... What is the person then? What is the person that is practicing? That's one of the questions that came up. Well, what are there people? Is there only illusion? It's like a dream and it's like an illusion, so there aren't any beings to save, really, because they're not really there. Or are they? I think it's really important that we start talking about person. What is a person? We Buddhists need to really start to think about this. What do we mean by a person in Buddhism? What do we mean? Well, I've got you to think about what we mean by self, but what do we mean by person? So you've got the world, and this is one of the questions that came up a lot. Well, what is a consensus world then? How come we can arrange to be here at this time and place and have a meeting if there's nothing there other than our imagination, or like if it's all mind-made and it isn't anything, then how can we arrange to come together and meet together at this time? What does that say about you as all of us as a person, and our world, our body, our mind, our world, our connections? There's some connection there, isn't there? It's very clear, actually. It's very clear, like those people online, they're here because we can, the connection with them is very clear. I don't think to myself, that's just my sense impressions. They're not really there. Or even the people in the room, I don't say they're just my sense impressions, they're not really there. But I don't have an experience outside of my own experience. But I'm relating to your mandalas and my own mandala. It's not inside, it's not outside, it isn't anywhere. But still it's very clear where my mandala meets your mandala. Sort of like definite response. That's expressions on your faces is really, it's coming to me as something very more real than anything else, I'd say, actually. So you are people. You are people, and I, like myself, I'm thinking, well, there's something here that's choosing as well, isn't there? Like a person chooses. If we're going to be enlightened, we as people are going to choose. We're going to choose to listen to the Dharma. We're going to choose to practice. We're going to choose to look and to understand and to drop what needs to be dropped, open to what needs to be open. Something is choosing, and in each one of us that is actually quite precisely us, isn't it? As a person. Could you say that is what we are in ourselves? Could you use self for that? I don't see why not. Seems a proper sort of word to use for it. And that aspect of us that is, you could say, volitional or choosing or free, you could say, because you can only choose if you're free, can't you? And what is the quality of nirvana or enlightenment or our true nature? It's freedom, isn't it? We couldn't be freed unless we had within ourselves that ability to be freed. To be free. If our nature wasn't free, we could never be freed. So that ability to choose and to be free is what each one of us is as a person. That's our most essential nature, if you like, is freedom to choose where to, how to live, how to be, how to express ourselves. It's interesting, isn't it? All this talk about not self actually has to be balanced with what is self. What is a person? And then all the talk about separate and not separate has to be talked about in the light of actually we're all distinct. Otherwise there'd only ever be one Buddha, wouldn't there? There'd be one Buddha and we'd all dissolve into one Buddha because we're actually one Buddha, but actually we're each Buddhas, complete Buddhas. We're all pervading Buddhas. So what we are as a person and what we mean by a personal mandala that we're trying to liberate, it's really important that we recognise that. Don't know what it is, can't pin it down and never will be able to pin it down. But it's real. We as people are real. That's why love makes any sense, doesn't it? That's why all the qualities about the heart make sense. But we're not separate. If you can grasp it and if it's separate, it's no longer heart language anymore, is it? It's no longer what's really meaningful. So I've gone way off from the Chittamatra view because you keep asking questions. Sort of, what's left then? So would the world still be there if I wasn't? And are beings just my mind, or do I need to help them? That was one of the questions. And what are heart connections? So, you're driving this discussion. And what is a person? Yes. And yes, it's important to recognise that Chitta is saying that I only know my own experience isn't the same as saying everything I experience exists only through my experience. Because then the world would disappear, wouldn't it? If it only exists through my experience, But maybe it exists, but not separate from my experience. But I might not always be aware of it. Like something cannot be separate from my experience, but I'm actually not aware of it. What could I give an example? You know, my attention might not be focused on it. So it's actually in my experience, but my attention isn't focused on it. But it hasn't disappeared and it hasn't become separate from my experience because, you know, like, say for example the sky. I'm not thinking about the sky. I'm not aware of the sky. Yeah, I think it's quite. I'm in quite a small room. But actually, the sky space hasn't become separate from my experience. Just because I'm not focusing my awareness on it. So it's not separate. You can say it's still there, it hasn't changed. That part that can, I say part, that faculty to move and to express and to choose is doing something else. It's not looking there. That's us to a T, isn't it? We have this nature of openness, clarity, sensitivity, but we're not looking at it. We're not allowing ourselves to recognise it. We're not recognising it, but it's not separate from our experience. Especially the vastness of it and all the qualities that it has. We're scarcely aware of it, but it's not separate from us because it is us. You know, if you got this Buddha nature idea, you know, it's not separate from us. Even though I'm not aware of it in a funny way. I can't align with it somehow. Then when you say, well, I'm not aligning with it, what's the I that's not aligning with it? You know, what's that? It doesn't ever go anywhere. It's always there. You could call it I, or you could call it self, or you call it Buddha nature, call it jnana, or you call it whatever you like. But it's never separate from enlightenment, but something's obscured, isn't it? So you have to be careful not to go overboard into thinking you don't exist. As much as you have to not go overboard into thinking you do. Maybe I'll start looking at the actual questions. Oh yes, this was an interesting one. Can we exist without any senses? Would we still be... Well, we can't, it could never be, could it? Because we couldn't ever be separate from openness, clarity, sensitivity. But I suppose you could be not, that could not be expressing itself through senses as we know them now. Like you can lose your sense of hearing, you can lose your vision, you can lose your sense of taste, you can lose your sense of physics. You can have sensory deprivation, can't you? It's quite interesting. If something happens, but the one that personal mandala would then be a personal mandala pervaded by this either enlightenment or confusion at not having any access to the senses, wouldn't it? Maybe fear, maybe something. It would be experiencing something. Might be bliss, might be fear, might be torture. But there would be something. Well, you can't call it something, can you? But that personal, that mandala, that person wouldn't just disappear. It's not possible. But the mandala would have become rather bizarre, rather strange.
The formless God.
Yeah, yeah. Or some of the hells. Yeah. Or some of these places where you can get very stuck. Yeah. But yes, a formless God would be, well, yeah, I should think would be an example. So is there an idea of a material world existing if we lost every sense? Yeah, it's the same question, isn't it? Could we be alive? Is that what alive means, to have your senses working and functioning? And then you think about these people who are in locked-in syndrome, don't you? To be alive would be to know that you were still there in that mandala. Still be connected to that mandala, but not be able to express anything within that mandala. Then, when that mandala eventually died, it would be liberated again into another mandala, wouldn't it? So that central point of emanation, that is our own personal mandala, is always there. And it isn't, although I call it a point of emanation, of course a point means it isn't anywhere, it hasn't any dimensions, and yet a point is the most precise point of place, determines everything else in relationship to itself. I think that's a really good, I find that a really helpful simile for what a person is. It's very precise, and yet at the same time no dimensions, can't be traced to anything, and it has the extra quality of being alive. You know, when we talk about a point, we don't think of it as being alive, but a person is the same as a point, but it's alive. That does mean something, doesn't it? So I'm reading about perceiver and perceived and their interdependency. Yeah, this is interesting, because if you're thinking in terms of the skanders, and you're thinking in terms of taking an object that's separate from the mind, or in case of the mind, you're taking it as a subject-object dichotomy, you've always got this problem of you can't have a knowing without a known, you can't have a known thing without a knower, and you can't have anything that goes from one moment to the next. So you've got an awful lot to pack into a moment of consciousness, haven't you? Like, what could it be? It's got to have a known aspect, it's got to have a knowing aspect, it's got to have some way that it can remember and know what's happened before, or plan what's going to go ahead. How do you fit it into that moment? And nonetheless, we still think that way, don't we? And that's what Vijnana is. So when we're talking about the interdependency, dependent arising of, and this is really moving on to Madhyamaka, the dependent arising of the moment of consciousness, we're kind of showing again that it doesn't really work. You can't have the one without the other. So how can they both, one depend on the other, because the other one isn't there till the other one's there. It doesn't even exist until it's there. Nonetheless, when you say it in an ordinary kind of way, obviously I can't have a knowledge of this glass unless there's an object of knowledge that I'm aware of. You know, there has to be two sides to it, doesn't there? And it isn't that when you realise how it really is, it's one or the other. Or it's all mind, or it's all material, or objective. It's that I know it in a different way, much more direct way. But you could say intuitive awareness, moving in space. It's complete accuracy. I think I've dealt with some of these as I went along. There's a question that two people asked was looking at progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, and in the old version it's 32 and 33, and in the new version it must be about 46, I think. There's a part where I'm talking about one knows one is awake because, this is talking about the dream example, because time is passing in a regular manner, so that one can synchronize events with an apparent, stable and independent outside world. And when events occur together, they are automatically synchronized, and if they do not, one thinks up a reason to explain it. So I think you're probably all a bit mind-boggled by that. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, here we are. It's on page 48. Subjective nature of time. One knows one is awake because time is passing in a regular and predictable. These are various ways of examining how do you know this isn't a dream. And then we tend to think, well, we know it's not a dream because time is passing and we can arrange to meet together at this time and we all turn up. So it's all very predictable, and we can synchronize events because, you know, I can say we'll all come together at the same time, and we can all come together at the same time. You know, we can drive along the road and, you know, everything's going along in more or less predictable way. So I can guess what speed somebody's going at and pass them, and, you know, everything's kind of all of a piece. This is only another function of the stable way in which one experiences how one's experience is unfolding. So it doesn't mean the world is outside of ourselves, the fact that everything's synchronized. It means that whatever it is we're experiencing has some structure to it that is connected to the structure of other beings. So their mandala and our mandala, they're working in together somehow, but that doesn't prove that they're outside or we're separate from each other. In fact, subjectively, time seems to be going fast or slow according to one's mood and situation. As for synchronizing when events occur together, like us all meeting here, they are automatically synchronized, and if they do not, so automatically we don't have to wonder to ourselves whether it's how it's happening. We can just say, we'll all meet tomorrow, you know, at 2 o'clock, and we all come and we all follow what we usually do to get here. And when we get here, we think, right, well, we've all got here at the same time. So that's it. That kind of proves everything's as we thought it was. But actually, it might not work. Somebody might not turn up. So then immediately we start to think, so according to our view of how things are, what could have happened? Well, maybe they had an accident, or maybe, you know, something happened, or maybe they changed their mind. So we find some reason that still fits our view. But then if something happens which we absolutely cannot explain, which things do happen, don't they? And we're very, very reluctant to accept that they haven't been explained according to our worldview. You know, we will bend over backwards to say, well, it wasn't that they were taken away by the fairies. No, you know, we're not going to go down that route. You know, it wasn't that they were taken away by the fairies. It was that they changed their mind, or they've been very upset recently and they're not feeling... You know, we would find any other excuse that would fit our worldview than to start to say it was the fairies. But of course, in another culture where they accept the fairies, do things like that, that would probably come up as one of the first possibilities. It would be part of their worldview. So everybody would have a sort of consensus view, and they all would have memories of this kind of thing happening and stories, and it would all be quite normal to think they'd taken away by the fairies. And if something happened that they completely couldn't understand because they had no experience of it, again, it would be like, there's some further knowledge I haven't got, but basically my worldview still is as it is. And if something happened that proved this world wasn't as we thought it was, we'd probably ignore it. I'm trying to think of an example. Like if they'd fallen out of the universe altogether into a different dimension altogether, in a way that we completely had no sense that that could have happened, we'd probably start to think we'd imagined them all along, that they never were there or something like that. You know, that did fit with our world. Rather than to accept actually our whole idea of the world being as it is actually not right. It isn't there. Somebody could just disappear because it isn't there. It's almost impossible for us to kind of think, oh yeah, fine. Because that would mean everything that we thought about everything was being questioned. So that's what I meant by it. If one cannot, one calls it a mystery. It's a mystery. But the world is actually as I thought it was. But there's just this little mystery. Whereas actually the mystery is showing the world isn't what you thought it was at all. Never was. Can't be. But we think, no, it's as I thought it was, but there's this little bit that's just a mystery. It's true, isn't it? Mm-hmm. There's plenty of unsolved mysteries. So I don't know if that answers the question. I know one of the people asking it was Patrick, was Gendon.
Thumbs up.
Okay, good. I knew I was going to have difficulty with these questions because they kind of open up. Each question opens up the whole thing, and I don't know quite where to stop on any one of them. So another one. Oh yes, on page 44 of the new version and page 29 of the old version, the whole of existence is empty of a duality of substance between mind and matter. That's exactly how they translate it in Tibetan. There's, well, no, they don't say matter, do they? Zungzin, they talk about between absent of there's no difference in substance between the perceiving mind and the perceived object, which often gets translated as mind and matter. Because we tend to think the perceived object is matter, don't we? But then even a thought is a perceived object, isn't it? So it's not really right to call it mind and matter, although that's included. I mean, that's one of the things that's being looked at, but also mind and the object of mind. But then that's easy to understand. There's no difference in substance, isn't there? Because we understand something in our mind is not different from the mind that's seeing it. Not a different substance. It's not different. It's also mind. So if I think of something, it's my mind still, and the mind that knows it is my mind still. So they're both mind. Whereas if I think of what I think is an object, substance, I think, well, that's my mind and that's the substance, and they're different in substance. This is that, and then my mind isn't that, you know. My mind's different, isn't it? But it might be different, but is it separate? It's interesting, isn't it? But anyway, in this on page 44, I say something which perhaps I need to explain. I say it, even though the book is said to be by Rinpoche, but actually I wouldn't have said any of it if he hadn't have taught what he taught. So it is what he taught, but then I put it into words. So if there's anything wrong with the words, it's because of me, because I wrote them. But I'm writing what I think I'm hearing from Rinpoche, so it's actually Rinpoche's teaching. So it's by him, but I keep talking about it as if it's by me. So where's that? 44. Mind is, at one and the same time, both real and empty. This is the Chittamatra, this is what they say. It's real in the sense that all experience is basically a manifestation of mind. It is empty in the sense that it is not a permanent, single, independent entity. Or you could say permanent, unitary, independent entity. It is instead a stream of fleeting, dependently arising moments of consciousness, vijnana. Furthermore, all phenomena pertain either to the inner perceiving aspect of consciousness or to the outer perceived aspect of consciousness. In other words, they are all mind. So the whole of existence is empty of a duality of substance between mind and matter. This means, and this is where the question comes up, this means there is no limit to the mind or its power. So, and then it goes on a bit more. So in principle, a person could realize the full powers of the Buddha's enlightenment and work for the liberation of all beings. On reflection, one can see that the shravaka approach is similar to removing suffering in a dream by recognizing that the person in the dream is not really oneself. The Chittamatra approach is like removing the suffering by realizing that both the cause of the suffering, for example the fire or the tiger, and the person suffering are both nothing more than the play of the mind, Realizing that, one realizes that the fire or the tiger and the one suffering are empty of any reality of their own, other than being the play of the mind. Furthermore, recognizing that it is the mind producing both, one could choose to dream of whatever one wanted to. Not only is one liberated from the illusion of self, one is liberated from the sense of powerlessness. That sense of powerlessness prevents one realizing one's true nature and limits one's capacity for compassionate action. So the question was about, so one could choose to dream of whatever one wanted. Does this mean that the illusion of duality is real? When the illusion of duality is realized, we can manifest and control our worlds. If so, isn't there still a perceiving self doing the controlling of a perceived world? And wouldn't all the suffering beings simply be a play of the mind, like people in a dream that are illusory and aren't really suffering? Would you still need to wake them up? So we talked about the second part of the question, but going back to the first part of the question, which relates to the next question, is when you know you're dreaming, you can choose to change the dream. So who's this you who's actually changing the dream? And are you actually in control? I think rather than saying controlling, I would say one's choosing. So when we talk about mandalas, when you have the A and the VAM, and you have the VAM, the person so chooses to enter a certain mandala, and as they choose to enter it, they create it, but it's sort of co-created with what the mandala that's there that they're entering. So as they enter it, they are actually integral to it, and they are actually changing it as they enter it. It would be the same when we made a pranidhana, which is the next question. So when you become aware of a mandala, you think, I want to deliver all sentient beings from suffering, or certain beings from a certain thing, or want to achieve a certain thing. So something's manifesting, something is kind of, you're aware of a mandala that you're entering, and as you enter it, you can choose how you're going to enter it. So that's your personal volition that, that never goes anywhere. You can do that. And that's actually intrinsic to your being, that you can follow that intention through. And in a way, your true body is your personal mandala. So it can follow through into your personal mandala, which actually doesn't have any end to it. So it could pervade all beings. There's no reason why it shouldn't. So going back to the dream example, it would just be a small example of the power the mind has to, as a mandala begins to manifest, you can enter it and co-create it, as it were, and it would go in the direction you wanted it to go. But it would actually be there would actually be a mandala there of some kind, but it wouldn't be a mandala that had all the connections of a waking mandala. So in a dream, it's quite limited in what it can accomplish. But I would imagine if you were enlightened and your awareness was not limited in any way, if you made a pranidhana or a wish in a dream, I can imagine it could be much more effective in the world. But again, it would depend on the rest of the connections in the mandala. So if you were trying to help somebody, for example, then your intention can pervade that whole mandala. But it would depend on the structure and the connections within the mandala, how much that could help that particular being, because the whole mandala would be there. So the whole mandala would be affected, but you could do something that would be beneficial. But whether you could have a precise change that you wanted would depend on all the other, a whole structure within the mandala that you were co-creating, I suppose you call it. Does that make sense? So we could go into a room with the intention to help somebody, but we could help them, but how much would depend on what the other connections were in the room. Yeah, I'm just thinking on my feet when I'm answering this. Yeah.
It just seems a little sort of unidirectional. I mean, obviously it's not, but in terms of in that dream, connections could come.
Yes.
To you. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
There's a receptivity as well as a.
That's right.
Creativity.
But I don't think Rinpoche
is
is talking about dreams in that way when he uses the dream example. But when you're talking about dream yoga and stuff like that, you start to realise, oh, hang on, dreams aren't so different from waking reality. Actually, if you because there is something there from its own side. But normally we don't think of that, do we? We think it's just a dream, and unless we think, oh, it's a significant dream or something. But if we put that sort of discussion out to one side and just talk about ordinary confused dreams, yeah, but it's an interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, how different is a world in which the mind is, in which there is no a non-dual world, how different is a non-dual world from a non-dual dream?
Yes, how different is a dream from
a non-dual dream?
And how different is the waking world from it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a very interesting question. So this is just sort of, we're just finding our way in here in the Chittamatra view. I think there's some interesting things to examine and are alluded to as well in the Chittamatra texts. They talk about this exact thing of meeting, yogins meeting in each other's minds, like what's going on, which is the same sort of thing, isn't it? Like if you could meet somebody in a dream, then you're entering into each other's minds. So what are we talking about? And I think they sometimes use these as an example, so I think they are actually, wondering about things like that. No, I just came and visited you in your dream. So what does that tell us about the nature of connections? How could that be? How could I ever know someone else's mind because it's your mind? And yet actually something does come back. I think it could be much more subtle than we think. Anyway, I'll have to finish. It's a bit of a ramble, but what I thought I might do is to try and answer some of these questions, on email, because then I've got the question in front of me, and I can then give an answer. Because if I don't read out the whole question, then my answer doesn't meet the question, and then if I do read out the question, it brings in all sorts of different things all at once. Anyway, I hope that was a bit helpful. Did anyone want to ask anything? Yes?
I don't know whether that will make sense. Something about what you were talking about, know and known, and this phrase which I think Wisdom Shikha used, and I kind of keep hearing it all the time, which is all you've got is your experience.
Yeah.
And I think I had an aha moment when I realized that we assume this to mean there is nothing outside of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't say that, does it? All you've got is your experience doesn't necessarily mean there is nothing outside of your experience. Because the next thing I was thinking was, so maybe that phrase is not about the world out there and the mind inside.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is more about how to know the world, that the only way to know the world is through direct experience.
Yes.
Rather than all there is kind of thing.
Yes, that's definitely what it's getting at. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could express it as outside, but it is about how to relate to our life and experiences by recognizing that that's all we have. So we've got to rely on it, haven't we?
As ability rather than the worldview.
Yes, I see what you mean.
The worldview, and the other one is actual ability of your mind.
Yes, it's about the actual ability of the mind, yes. Yes, all we have, the only ability we have is to know our experience. And a way of recognising that would be, sort of like to introduce the other sentence. There's nothing outside of our mind, but that's only to get us to realise what you just said. That the way to know our experience is to recognise it is our experience. Direct experience, yeah. We don't have to know anything else, actually. Because we tend to think we do, don't we? We tend to think we have to find something outside, whereas actually we only have our experience and that's enough, because we're going to find everything in our experience. Is that what you're asking?